Well, hello, everybody. People are just streaming in right now. My name is Josh Wachtel, and I'm the Director of Communications for Building a New Reality. And I'm very excited to be hosting this webinar for all of you today, from micro to macro, restorative practices going to scale in enterprise and governance, especially governance, we'll be talking about a lot today. So I just want to welcome you all. If you'd like to type into the chat where you're coming from, it's always so great to see where folks are joining us from. I would like to invite Ted Wachtel to turn on his screen at this point. I'm told that I haven't enabled chat. I'm so sorry. Let me okay, there we go. Now everybody should be able to chat it and let us know where you're coming in from. And oh, there we go. Mobile, Alabama. Our guests are Anke Segers and Gert van Jan Slump from the Netherlands, and Brett Hennig, who, well, he's from different places. He's going to be talking about the United Kingdom in particular, and well, he's actually just typed in Budapest. So, and here is Ted Wachtel, who is the founder of Building a New Reality. So, Ted, how about you kick us off and please say a few words about this webinar and why you're really excited to be hosting this as well.
Well, it's gathering together some people who are actually making real and important things happen in the world in a direction that's hopeful, because there's so much that's obviously distressing right now, and you know, a new outburst of colossal violence in the Middle East. So we need to be working harder to make things happen. And I'm basically interested in hearing people's reaction ultimately to the idea of expanding the restorative practices continuum, of actually taking it beyond what used to be the boundary of formal conferences, family group conference, real justice conference, etc., to something much larger. So,
okay. So yeah, with Building a New Reality, we're essentially a nonpartisan movement that's starting from a place of restorative practices, and that knowledge that when people are given voice and choice, as well as a share of responsibility, things go better. Better decisions are made, people are happier, they're more engaged. And so, you know, while restorative practices is functioning in a lot of one-to-one and small group and organizational efforts, this session today is really about taking it to even larger groupings of people, both you know, communities, and you'll hear some examples of what we mean by this, and also at a government level, whether it's municipal or state or even national. So at this point, Ted, I'm going to share that slide if you want to get started on your piece, and I'll share the new continuum that you've been talking about.
So simply, I want to briefly trace the origins of restorative practices as beginning with restorative justice in the 1970s, and the use at that time of victim offender mediation as an innovative response to wrongdoing. That's when I first began to hear about it. Now, of course, people talk about the indigenous roots of many of these practices, but I think in terms of how it unfolded for those of us who've been working in these areas, it started in justice, with restorative justice. And in the 1990s, however, the use of two formal processes, the Family Group Conference, which originally came out of New Zealand, and the Real Justice Conference, which came out of Australia, they both enlarged the conversation by including not just so-called victims and offenders, but family and friends of victims and offenders. In 1999, in my paper, Restorative Justice in Everyday Life, Beyond the Formal Ritual, which was actually the first academic paper I ever wrote in this field. And I actually got help from, I wrote to John Braithwaite and asked him for some advice because it was at a conference he was running in Australia. But the formal ritual was all we knew at that time. But I used the term restorative practices to include informal responses to wrongdoing. I had learned from a visit from Terry O'Connell, the founder of the well, we called it the Real Justice, but the scripted conference used by police officers originally. His perception was when he came to visit our schools and group homes that we were doing restorative conferencing all day long. And that's when we began to realize this can happen informally. And we also began to advocate for proactive restorative practices that restore community, especially in terms of building a positive culture in schools and in workplaces. So using affective questions and affective statements to foster conversation in one-to-one and small group circles and impromptu conferences. And they're all helped by Terry O'Connell's innovative restorative questions, which are designed to bring out affect. So all of these practices are characterized by participatory learning and decision-making. And, you know, as people respond to the questions, the restorative questions, what happened? Who's been affected? What was the hardest thing for you? They're engaged in participatory learning at a very fundamental level about the facts and feelings of the situation. With the question, what has to happen to make things right? They begin the participatory decision-making process. So in a variety of multi-country research studies, over 90% of participants in these kinds of processes reported a strong sense of fairness and satisfaction. And when I say 90%, that is really unusual to get consistently across different countries, different parts of America, and in different, done by different, you know, some by police, some by educators. But the point is, restorative types of interventions like restorative conferencing elicit a almost universal strong sense of fairness and satisfaction. And most significantly, these processes improve interpersonal feelings and foster a congenial atmosphere. I think that, Josh, do you want to?
Yeah. Sorry, do you want to?
Yeah, just want to. Pardon? Next, yeah, that's fine. When we go from left to right, from the simplest to the most complex, we always said it went from informal to formal. We talked about how more people tended to be involved, and we took it up to formal conferences, the FGC and the Real Justice Conference. But when I encountered community processing and citizens' assemblies, I realized they did all of the same, that you went through the same kinds of going from learning to decision-making, a growing comfort level, people beginning to actually enjoy the social connections they're making. So except for the size of the problems and the number of people affected, sometimes on a regional or even national level, participants in community processing and citizens' assemblies find these macro restorative practices fair and satisfying, and they experience positive interpersonal feelings and a congenial atmosphere. Could you put the next slide, Josh? Thanks. So I've developed a map to track the development of restorative practices in the past and to explore the potential use of restorative practices in the future. Having started with justice in the 1970s, restorative practices have been substantially implemented additionally in learning and care settings. Obviously, schools, group homes. Actually, drug and alcohol processes are often inherently restorative. And the advent of community processing and citizens' assemblies now illustrates the potential for restorative practices in governance and enterprise. And that's what I'm excited about exploring tonight in the webinar.
All right. Thank you, Ted. Okay. At this point, I would like to invite our first guest, Anke Seegers, to show her video and come on the screen. And yes. All right, Anke. So you're involved with community processing, and I'm going to let you speak about that. Thank you for being here.
I will share some sheets.
Okay.
I wrote it all out, so sometimes you maybe see a paper, but that's only just because I want to say the right things. Nice to be here. Thank you for inviting me. My name is Anke Seegers. I'm from the Netherlands. I've been working on building a new reality for, I think, over 20 years. I'm an organizational psychologist and group conflict mediator. I've authored 2 books. I've delivered numbers of keynotes in the Netherlands, but also in other countries, and I've conducted training sessions. I also guide governments and organizations in decision-making processes on the new route. Ted asked me to tell you about a large-scale decision-making process on the new route around a hospital bankruptcy. So, of course, I will do that, but I will also give you some background and insights in this, for me, almost magical process. Large-scale complex issues involving diverse groups, diverse opinions and interests are often addressed using the old conventional route. People are allowed to contribute ideas, but ultimately a small group makes the decision for the large group. Nowadays, this approach faces resistance, complaints, and the feeling of not being heard. We need, I think, a radical change. Doing the same thing over and over again and expecting different results is not sustainable. It started with my realization that it's common to make decisions for others, whether that's in education, where I originated, or in the social sector. When I was a regional manager in an organization around family group conferencing, I noticed that people's motivations to make decisions together was mainly driven by the desire to retain ownership of the issues and ownership of the solutions. Often the motivation isn't the longing for a new reality, but it's the escape from the existing reality that motivates. The system of dominance exists in all domains, not just the social sector. It's time for a partnership system where everyone collaborates equally based on their knowledge and experience, and instead of the dominant system where the small group decides for the large group. This dominant system that we have adopted from past times, but no longer works. I discovered that we often follow the same route in group decision-making, which I call the old route. And it's very important that people see this so they can recognize what they do, because a lot of times people think they're doing really great things, but then if you really look at the process, they do the same. And this is the route I'm talking about. In the old route, step one is allowing people to contribute ideas. So everybody can tell, can say what their ideas are. But then step two involves in collecting these ideas. You know, somebody takes the ideas from the people. And step three sees the usual decision makers making the final decisions. We followed this route for a long time, but it's now met with resistance and problems and polarization. People don't feel heard, and that's not because of the issues that we talk about, but it's because of the process that we follow, this route we follow every time. And things can be radically different, and it is, I think, urgently needed, because, you know, we can't keep doing the same things over and over again, expecting different results. In 2015, a hospital in the north of the Netherlands went bankrupt. The people affected, whether citizens or professionals, resisted the decisions made by the health insurance company and the government. Eventually, we applied a large-scale new route process, a form we later started calling community processing. It is focusing not only on making a plan with all who are involved, but it's also restoration in cases involving different interests and conflicts. It's a restorative practice approach, just like Ted already said. In the new route, the usual decision makers set the framework beforehand, but they don't have the final say. So they set the framework beforehand, but they do not have the final say. And that's the difference with a normal approach. That's what you see here. You see it's shifted. It starts with a clear issue, followed by preparing all the stakeholders, usually in small groups or one-on-one. And in some cases, this involves 43 people, and in some cases, we prepare 255 persons. And in the case of Dokkum, with the hospital, we spoke to and we prepared more than 1,600 people. On the decision-making day, 300 people in 21 rooms participated, with spokespeople in the inner circle explaining their plan. So they were in the inner circle with me, but everybody could see everything because we had cameras everywhere. And in villages and towns around the hospital, others gathered remotely to contribute. So they were apping and they were mailing and they were talking to each other, so that everything from the outside, I don't know if you can see it, but from far away came closer and then into the inner circle. It was a really tense day, but after 13 hours of decision and adjustment, we had a plan consisting of 6 large sheets with solutions to the problem. The new buyers of the hospital accepted the plan because it met the criteria. Unfortunately, the health insurance company withdrew 1 day before the decision-making day. So that was a disaster. But since everyone was prepared, no, I couldn't say but the but will come later. Since everyone was prepared, the resistance against the health insurance company began to decrease, and they were no longer threatened. So they thought, okay, now we feel good enough that we can continue with our own plan. That's why they went through themselves out of the decision-making day. But we had a large group of people ready to participate, and it would have been completely unfair to stop now. Moreover, this would lead to riots. So we let the day proceed because the new buyers of the hospital, they promised to implement the plan if it met with the criteria. In the meanwhile, years after that, we have conducted new route process related to safety in neighborhoods. I don't know if I pronounce this right, but I think it's nuances. Nuances.
You perfect. Nuances.
Okay, nuances. Community centers, a nature reserve, collaboration policies, health and sports, and energy transitions. So that's also a very big part now. This approach can be applied wherever groups have different opinions and different viewpoints, and we need a plan. That was all I had to say.
All right.
Thank you.
Thank you, Anke. So you're going to be running the slides for Gert-Jan? Is that correct?
Yes.
Okay, so Gert-Jan, please put your video on.
I did, I guess.
All right. I'm trying to find you down here on my screen so I can promote you. All right.
So do you want me to stay or?
You can turn your video off and Ted as well. So go ahead, Gert-Jan.
Thank you
for being here.
Well, I'm Gert Slump. I'm a criminologist from Amsterdam, the co-founder of Restorative Justice the Netherlands, and I'm on a journey reforming our criminal justice system. If we can open a hospital, we can change the way we lock up people by replacing large-scale prisons by small-scale prisons. And we can influence, at least that's what I believe, not only the deliberative spaces or the community processing spaces in which we can do the process of decision making together with the people, but we can make the framework change as well, because most of the times the framework is defining how much space you have. What I experienced is that it depends on what kind of environment you are. Criminal justice system is really a coercive system, while there are other systems or organizations that might be more permissive and responsive, having just another kind of frameworks. Having said that, we tried to influence the Dutch criminal justice law twice, successfully in one respect, because we have a law proposal on implementing more restorative justice provisions in our criminal justice system very successfully. Having the criminal justice system, well, not changing from a coercive to a permissive system, but creating permissive spaces in a, I have to say, in a civil law system, because it's different from a common law system in which the space is different, although the coercion is even there. And of course, my dream is to open up these frameworks into a more responsive environment, not only implementing criminal justice, restorative justice provisions within the criminal justice, but even influencing the way people come to the decision on what should happen after a crime. So we just had a citizens initiative in our parliament on replacing small-scale detentions, which are 80% of our incarcerated persons in the Netherlands, by more community-oriented solutions. And the next level might be that if we succeed in doing that, there will be a more permissive space within the criminal justice sentencing, even to have more decision making together with the people involved in the criminal justice system. So I really do believe that besides outside the criminal justice system, and Ted pointed out the areas in which restorative practices expanded, I'm really much concentrating on the criminal justice, on the criminal justice reform, and looking for spaces in which we can decide together on the future of not only the sentencing we are coming up with in our community, but even changing the systems. And I really do believe that if we want to change, for example, the way we lock up people or don't lock up people, because the dream is that we have houses of restoration in our communities instead of prisons. I guess community processing might be a very fruitful thing to use, because you cannot say to people, here you have a house of restoration, get on with it, a lot of luck with it. So it needs to be part of a more deliberative space in which we think about what's needed to have a good life in this neighborhood. So I will follow up on that in due time. We succeeded to have 2 influencing law proposals to influence the framework in the Netherlands. And to me, it's equally important to putting up processes within this frameworks that we are facing when we are organizing our restorative practices. I will leave it with that, because Anke has had a beautiful exposure on community processing, so that story already has been told. But I would like to share this 3 steps thing on the difference of frameworks we are facing when using deliberative processes, restorative processes, community processing, etc., etc. And yes, one remark: we have a very beautiful example of influencing the law already, because in our youth law, the family group deliberation has been written into the law as one of the rights of persons. Although, and that's what I learned from that experience, the form is so form-free that people cannot rely upon it as a right. So you still are dependent on a much more or less permissive youth law system, while we could have had a more responsive youth law system if we would have been more exact on the framework of that law. So, with having said that, I leave it with that and give it back to you, Joshua.
Okay, thank you. There are a few questions for the 2 of you about your presentation. Just some folks were asking about whether the large group of people, when you're establishing the decision-making framework for a certain community process, are they able to give input before that framework is set that the small group will initiate?
Right, that the large group will not have influence on the framework, because the framework is like the law.
Okay.
What does the law say? How much money is there to use? And it's the parties that are chosen or that we have voted for, that we feel are responsible for things like that. So it's usually it's not a wish list of the decision makers, but it's a framework that's really normal. It's what does the law say? Maybe Gert-Jan, maybe you can explain it.
Yeah, well, these are the kind of rules or regulations on which the classical decision makers have to comply with as well. So this is the kind of things like the rule of law, the things we have written down in our law systems. We have written down in policy programs for the next 4 years. So those are the things. Yes, of course, you can go to the meta level of that, and I guess Brett will come up onto that with choosing citizens to decide on the framework of, for example, the policies for the next 4 years. Yeah. But up until that, you are facing the same boundaries and frameworks which the usual decision makers are facing as well. Because if we give up that, it's like chaos.
Mm-hmm. So I guess in the sense that if you have people in the streets, that's an input, like we need this process. But as far as the actual framework, there's some guidelines that you have to use for that.
Yeah, but they can ask for it. They can ask for it.
Yeah. All right. There's
it's only fair that you know where your decision making stops, because you know I cannot say, for example, well, I think it's very important that this person will be punished, and in that way, or maybe we have a death sentence. You know, we don't have the death sentence in the Netherlands, so we cannot choose for that. So I have to know what is the range in which we can really decide.
Okay. I'm going to ask this question, so saying the questions, one thing we say in our organization is that restorative is not possible if there's not an established relationship to restore.
Mm-hmm.
In context, I take it to mean that if we were go to macro with restorative practices, what does the proactive relationship building look like for a community that is highly polarized? And I'm wondering if this is a question from the US, because we certainly do feel that we're in a very polarized atmosphere right now. But
Right.
I don't know if you can shed any light on that question.
It's usually about restoration, to restore the relationship or the trust in the government, or to restore the trust in each other, and maybe the trust in yourself.
Ted, do you have a thought?
It's not always about private relationships.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I mean, when we say our society is polarized and therefore there's not a relationship, but in fact, there are lots of elements of relationship, whether it's all my area, we're all excited about the Phillies and the Eagles as sports teams, and is a very unifying feeling. So you can go back to those, maybe not as important relationships, but there's always relationships to go back to, I think, in that sense.
And I guess issues on the street always relate to us together to a common challenge that we are facing. So I saw a question of Nicola. Hi, Nicola, about the use of the process to help to define the problem in the first place. It's about addressing an issue and to transform it into, as Anke always says, into a central question, a central issue which we can use to have a collective process. So yes, the process helps to define this problem because we start with that, but we transform it in the first phase into a central question.
Yeah, like what do we need to move on in life? Like a really broad question. And then in the process itself, the question gets more detailed for people.
All right.
So for example, thinking about the small-scale prisoners example, small-scale detention houses, we are not asking persons. The problem is not yes or no. Do we want a prison in our neighborhood? The question is, what is needed to have a safe environment? And I really do believe if we ask, if we address this issue to persons, it will be a totally different deliberation than we say here you have a small-scale prison. It's about the underlying issue that's at stake. It's not about the detention house, and I really do believe that we create this ownership. Then this detention house might be owned by the people themselves. Besides, there's kind of governance from the detention governors, etc., etc. But it's more owned by the persons.
Yeah, in most of the large-scale processes, the question is, I just couldn't think of it, but now I know. The question is, the central question is, what is needed so we can all be well? It's a really wide question.
All right. I think you've done a good job of tackling that, about, you know, how the question in itself brings people together.
Yeah.
So I'm going to let you guys rest for a moment, and I'm going to ask Brett Hennig to turn his video on, and he's going to talk about these Sortition Foundation and citizens' assemblies in this type of process. Thanks for being here, Brett.
Yeah, thanks, Josh. I'll
just a second.
turn on and show some slides as well. So yeah, my name is Brett Hennig. I'm from the Sortition Foundation. I'm actually Australian, but the Sortition Foundation is based in the UK, but I live in Budapest in Hungary, so it's quite complicated. The Sortition Foundation itself is a small not-for-profit company that advocates real democracy, and we're specialists in running democratic lotteries for deliberative democratic events. We've run 150 or so of these events in the last few years. For those people who aren't familiar with this term, sortition, I'll just give a very quick historical background. Sortition is just the technical name for lottery, for selection by lot. And in fact, it does date back to ancient Athens. For example, you can see comments in Aristotle's writing that it's thought to be democratic for the officers of constitutional government to be assigned by lot, and for them to be elected oligarchic. So in ancient times, they thought democracy meant lottery. And on the right there, there's a piece of a device that was used in ancient Athens called a clariterion to select people by lottery. Of course, we don't want to replicate Athens. There was slaves, women were excluded, non-citizens were excluded, but just a brief historical background. These days, the most citizens' assemblies citizens' assemblies are the modern incarnation of the use of democratic lottery. And for those of you who haven't heard of citizens' assemblies, they're really taking off in Europe. There's been many in Canada. There's been many in Australia as well. Quite a few in Japan and South Korea, actually, that they are taking off around the world. Unfortunately, the US is a bit of a desert in this respect, but we're hopeful. But the general idea of a citizens' assembly is that you select by lottery, by using random selection, a demographically representative bunch of people. So you have gender balance, you have all the age categories represented, you have the geographies represented, you can do a socioeconomic proxy as well, such as education. You bring this randomly selected representative bunch of people together over the span of 4 to 6 days, sometimes longer. You pay the participants to join that assembly, and you go through a process of informed deliberation. And what you get out of a citizens' assembly is it's not public opinion. It's not what people do think about a certain topic, but what they would think if they went through this process where they hear from experts, they hear from those people directly affected by the processes, and they come out with what we call public judgment. These citizens' assemblies have been done also with certain mechanisms that use an actual physical lottery, and I'll talk about one of those very soon. But typically, the algorithm that will choose a demographically representative bunch of people from the people who receive invitations is done by computer. There's one example is a global assembly that we tried to run. We did run around COP26 in Glasgow, where we did a population-weighted sample of points on the Earth, and then tried to bring together people from those locations together to talk about climate change. That was a successful experience. It was endorsed by the UN Secretary General, and they presented their results after COP26. Another recent example is in Germany. The national government of Germany has endorsed their first citizens' assembly on nutrition in transition. We randomly selected municipalities in Germany, invited people from those municipalities to participate, made sure that the 160 people were representative of Germany, and the first weekend of that happened last weekend. And the German government has committed to having another citizens' assembly after that. The French government, President Macron, has held 2 citizens' assemblies at national level. In the UK, there's been hundreds. In the Netherlands, we're seeing some local citizens' assemblies as well. And they're spreading across Europe. At the EU level, they've held a conference on the future of Europe, and they've held 3 European citizens panels, and they're holding more EU citizens panels where they bring together people selected by democratic lottery to talk about public policy issues. What we're also seeing is that these assemblies are becoming permanent, and in the UK, we're actually running a campaign to replace the House of Lords, a very anachronistic, very old-fashioned assembly, with a permanent House of Citizens. In Oost-Belgium, in the eastern region of Belgium, they've actually already set up a second chamber to accompany the elected chamber of a group of citizens selected by democratic lottery. I think in Paris at the city council level, that has also happened as well. So what we're seeing, at least in Europe, is a move from the hundreds of ad hoc citizens' assemblies to these becoming institutionalized or permanent in some places. And we're quite hopeful about our campaign in the UK. And I think I will leave it there and throw it back to you, Joshua, and to the audience.
Sure. Okay, so hang on there. We do have a couple questions. Well, actually, there's one particular question about with citizens' assemblies, how creating a representative sample is managed so that people in the minority might be disproportionately affected by the decision being made, that can be reconciled.
Yeah, so the assembly themselves are just directly representative of the community from which the political decision has to be made. So if it's a city council level decision, then the people that are brought together should be representative of the city council. If it's a national level decision, then the people should be representative of the nation state. That nature of representativeness is typically defined on gender, age, a socioeconomic proxy, geography, sometimes an urban-rural value as well, sometimes in the UK, ethnicity. If the topic you're talking about directly impacts certain elements of the population, then there are other ways to bring those people in as witnesses or as experts to the process. So, for example, Ireland, which is kind of the poster child at the moment for these assemblies, they had a citizens' assembly that talked on the constitutional ban on abortion in Ireland. And of course, they had women's groups and doctors and people more directly affected by this ban talk to that assembly. That then went to a referendum, which famously passed, and they removed that constitutional ban on abortion. Also in Ireland, they also had a discussion about same-sex marriage. And again, the Citizens' Assembly went through that process and proposed that the definition of marriage in the Constitution be changed. And that also then went to a referendum which successfully passed. They're now going to their third referendum as a result of a Citizens' Assembly on another clause in the Constitution, which is to do with, the clause has words such as women's place in the home, and they're going to remove that clause from their constitution, is the proposal coming from the next Citizens' Assembly.
So a follow-up question just came in, and I think in the United States context where, African Americans and other groups are in the minority, how do
we include
that's, is it bringing people together who are not politically, already bought and paid for? That's the difference that, creates the balance. I don't know if you can address that.
Yeah, there's there was this there was a great project run by James Fishkin at Stanford, I think it is, American One Room, where they brought 500 Americans together that was politically balanced, age, gender balanced, etc. And there's a very moving video of that process where they tried to stratify on those to make sure that it was actually representative in that room. There's another organization also in the US, in Oregon, I think, called Healthy Democracy, which brings together citizens' juries to talk about citizens' initiative proposals, actually. And again, what they do is it's a two-step process. Typically, you send invitations to randomly selected people. From those that reply, because of course we can't force them to participate, you offer as many incentives as you can. From those that reply, you then take the second selection by lottery to make sure that age, gender, and you can include ethnicity as that, of course. So often it's very common to ask, what ethnicity do you identify as, and to make sure that that matches the demographics of the local population.
Okay. Well, obviously it's very new days for all this stuff. And I can imagine a lot of questions are going to get worked out as things get done more and more. Can I invite everybody to turn their video on at this point, Anke and Gert, Jan as well? All right, thanks. I'm just wondering, Ted, do you have a comment after hearing all that you've heard and want to point in a certain direction here?
Well, I think the one thing that I found people are skeptical of is, can ordinary people actually carry out these roles? And is that actually, a friend of mine joked, well, my next door neighbor is always rushing home to see the latest whatever. And how can I trust her to be, if she got picked? And you must have some good ways of answering that.
I mean, from a citizen assembly perspective, there's now been, I think the OECD study, there's been like 700-800 citizens assemblies in the last decade or so. And so there's just a wealth of evidence that actually, everyday people brought together can deliberate successfully and come up with, very, sensible, common sense proposals that are actually, implementable as well. Of course, it does come down to how that process is structured, and it's really important that the process is done really well. You're moving from values to priorities to information to decision making, etc. But there's been a lot of climate assemblies across Europe, for example, but we've seen also assemblies on ethical issues such as assisted dying, on hate crime, on very practical issues like development of land. I haven't seen a policy area that can't be successfully dealt with by ordinary citizens in this process.
And yeah, Anke and Gert, Jan, how are you seeing that, criticism?
I would like to react, because I feel really handicapped because I speak Dutch and I don't have this fast talk, but I was writing something down because I think it is very important. We have this discussion here in the Netherlands, also in Germany and in France. Of course, there are very large issues that citizens' assemblies work really well. However, and I do have to say this, I'm sorry, in the Netherlands and also in France with Macron, the citizens' assembly is never decision-making. People make proposals, but in the end, so it's the old route, in the end, the usual decision-maker decides. At Macron, it was, I'm not exactly sure of the number, but I think it was this, 46 proposals were made and only six were accepted. And also we have sometimes that the lottery can polarize communities because some people are selected who think they for whom the issue is very important, and other people are not selected, and then they feel like they have to push their idea into the ones who are selected, and that causes tension in neighborhoods. We find that here in the Netherlands. So I know that in the Netherlands, the ideal is that it is real decision making, but now in the system incorporates this idea because it works, and people have the feeling, now we have something to say, but actually it's still the old route that the normal decision makers in the Netherlands, it's like that. The normal decision makers, they decide afterwards what they will do with these proposals. So the idea is very good. I know David from Rijbroek, and I know it's very good. It's the new form of democracy, a new democratic idea, but the system incorporates it and makes it to the old route. That's my humble opinion.
The expression we use is it co-opts it.
Yes.
It takes it in and makes it,
yeah. So
I know Brett's very aware of that and has opinions about that. And sure.
Of course, you want it differently. Yeah.
No, I completely agree. I think that, of course, the governments can cherry pick the proposals that come out. What I heard about the French was it was 40% so far that have been implemented in some form. Some of them were modified, but this is exactly why we want to see them actually institutionalized and be given real power. So although we like seeing these ad hoc assemblies occur because it promotes the idea and makes people more aware of those assemblies, for example, in Germany, we heard after the first National Assembly that the awareness of citizens' assemblies has doubled from like 25% to 50% amongst the population. But yeah, we need to institutionalize. We need to actually give them real power. Otherwise, as you say, they'll just be ignored.
That's why I focus so much on the two routes. So you can see.
I just ask a question on, a question on that. I don't know if I had this right, but just, I remember the story as I heard it, that you were asked by the politicians that invited you into North Friesland to let them decide, and you insisted, in fact, that the decision was concluded. You know,
right. Otherwise, we won't do it. I don't do processes that are not new route. Right. That's why I have these two routes so that we can make it really clear. You know, I think it's unfair to tell people you can have a say, but then you really can't.
I guess that has to do with the issues and things like that. So I always say the greater the unease is, the more important it is to involve all persons, all people to be involved in a process, to think about not only about the restoration part, but on the future part as well, to make the plan, to do the decision making in very clear frameworks. Of course, the government is thinking about frameworks. It's very hard for them because in the old decision-making routes, the framework is always overruled by the practice and saying, oh, we have spent more dollars than we used to spend on this project and things like that. So making the framework is the hardest thing to do for a government. But it's the most needy thing for the future, to have a trustful government, a realistic government, to be in place, to be a responsive government, instead of a permissive government in which we permit people to do the citizens' assembly thing and say, okay, we let you talk, but we are permissive, and then we decide. So how do we go to the more horizontal level? And the framework setting is so important. I learned that in the years that I'm now on restorative justice. So
yeah, but and it also happens to deep democracy. You know, deep democracy is also a very, very interesting form. I've been taught also in deep democracy, but then in our system in the Netherlands, we see a lot of deep democracy processes, but they're not really decision making. They are giving proposals.
Can I had a question about about your book, Anke, whether it be coming out in English, and I answered that. Not yet, but we'll let you know.
Not yet, but we would like. I would like to.
The follow-up book is, what resources? Maybe each of you can answer. Just any resources, particularly in English, that people might be able to look up to learn more. Is there anything?
Actually, not about the new route. It's new.
Oh wait, I have mentioned to people the community processing website is about .org. Has an English version of that at any rate. So but I found it equally frustrating. I have a friend, you know, I've asked if you can send him the book, but her newer book.
I will. Yeah. The newest book, and I think the newest book is also very translatable also to other situations in other countries, much more than my first book.
And Brett, you have a book that I think that's how I found out about you, actually.
Yeah, sure. It's called The End of Politicians, Time for a Real Democracy.
Good. Interesting.
You can also, of course, I've got a couple of TED Talks if you're interested in seeing a more spiffy 10-minute version.
Any of you who visit my master class will find Brett Hennig's talk highlighted. Well, one of them, I feature on that. Also, you know, other films about the Citizens Assembly, but obviously I can't do it in Dutch yet, but there'll be resources.
Katja and I, we gave this, We gave this masterclass 3 days also at the ministry in Estland. So
Estonia,
it is available in Estonia, I'm sorry. It is available abroad. Now, my English will be better when I've been in an English-speaking country for a longer time.
And if people are interested in a law intervention, we have this English version of the restorative justice interventions, trying to change the law, trying to broaden up. Yes, it's about mediation in criminal justice cases, but you could replace it by conferencing or anything you want. But the idea that the systematic thing of it is beautiful, I guess, because it's an intervention we did on the highest level. Coming with some papers to the parliament, they would have said, okay, thank you so very much. But now we came with a law proposal, and it was taken very seriously, just like a second law proposal was for a whole day in the news on alternatives to short-term detention. So the intervention of trying to change the framework is very, very, very promising. So I could share the Dutch or the English version of the law proposal for what it's worth. And I was thinking about sharing the journey we are on with small-scale detention houses, in which Anke is too, because these kind of processes are very important, transforming our criminal justice system, our prison system into a more humane, small-scale system. So I would like to share the English website of Rescale as well, if you're interested, but I'm not sure.
If I can suggest, yes, please. I don't know what you have time to put in the chat, but
I will. Yeah, and I will.
Andrew, if you'll send it to me, I'm going to be sending out an email.
I have 4 minutes.
So,
yeah, you can have the presentation also if you want to. So then people can
are going to be able to see this video. We're recording it and we'll immediately send it. Well,
good.
Shortly send it out with other things that you might want to send me to attach. So.
We got a couple minutes, and I think I want to direct one more question to Brett, or a group of questions about, how do you keep people from controlling the discussion groups and not imposing their own agenda? How it can be manipulated for political gain. What are some ways? Lobbyists, all the kind of things you think about, media campaigns.
Yeah, so I mean the lottery aspect is really key, of course. So when you select these people, it's a two-step lottery essentially. You do a lottery selection of the people, you send invites. Of those that reply, you then do a second lottery selection. So those people are never your usual suspects. There's no way to kind of influence them beforehand, at least anyway. The expert decision is really key, and the organizers of these events, if they're following OECD standards, will select a wide range of diverse experts who will never present original research, so to speak. They'll only present research that's already been peer reviewed, etc. You can also give the participants themselves the power over selecting which experts they want to hear from. Of course, that requires an assembly to meet over several weekends. And so that has also been done. The process people who run these deliberative events, such as Mass LBP in Canada, such as Involve in the UK, they are obviously all organizations that are committed to bringing people into the heart of decision making, and that their whole key ideal is to do this transparently in a good process. Typically, of course, you do an evaluation, and the citizens, the participants themselves at the end of the process will evaluate the table facilitators, etc. So you will have, if you have 100 people, they'll be often split in tables of 6 to 8 people. There'll be a professional facilitator at each table to make sure that no one dominates, that people speak up if they're being silent, that voices are heard at those tables. And they, at the end, they will actually rate, has the table facilitator tried to direct the conversation, etc. And typically they get amazing ratings. Of course, facilitation is a skill, as you all know. So, don't try to train some young students to do that. Use experienced facilitators, of course. They're all key questions, and it's really hard, but the main thing is that they've done it hundreds of times successfully now. And that's what gives me hope.
Thanks. Anke, do you want to answer kind of the similar question, your processes, how you ensure that it's not dominated by one group or another?
A lot of things Brett said, we do that too. we don't work with representation. So we make the group larger. If there is some person who thinks in front, oh no, if that person is there, he will dominate the conversation. We will say, you know, are there more people who have your view? Can we invite them too? So that helps. And also the other things that Brett said, that we can work in small groups. We only make a decision is if everybody says, okay, I can live with that. So that's also a role of me or another facilitator. Sometimes I have 100 people, and then I will ask, you know, at this point, as it is written, is there anybody who has anything that they cannot live with? You know, and if they have something, I use the deep democracy approach. So I say, you know, what do we need to, I don't know the English word, but what do we need to apply? What do we need to put down extra so that you can also live with this? So there's not one point that will go into the plan if there are people still not okay with that.
And I would like to add to that it's all about the preparation. Anke
Yeah.
stresses that in the 3-day training we give at least 10 times. It's all about the preparation. And then again, forms follows process, follows needs of the people involved. Not this is the form and we impose that on people. It's like, okay, what do you need? That's the first question. The very first question we pose to people when we prepare them. So.
Yeah, so what do you need so that you can say everything that is needed to be said? And then people will say, you know, I think it would be nice if we have somebody at the table who can correct people who say too much, or so then we come with extra facilitators. So that's not a standard thing in the process.
All right, I'm gonna thank you all. We've come up a little bit minute over time, but I really appreciate this discussion. I think our audience really has too. And we're going to be sending out some materials and recordings for folks who missed it. And you'll be able to share.
The chat will be saved. So, correct, Josh? You can save the chat.
I better do that now.
I'd say that.
Right, we're all set. Okay, so thank you, Gert, John, Anke, Brett. And thanks all of you for joining us today. We really appreciate it.
Have a nice day.
Good luck, everybody.
Stay safe, everyone.
Yeah.
Thank you very much.
Bye.
Good job. Bye.